I'm Sarah, 29, and I've spent my whole life being the daughter who didn't quite measure up. While my younger sister Amanda sailed through medical school with our family's full support, I've been working as a dental assistant in Denver, Colorado, living paycheck to paycheck in a cramped studio apartment. Amanda always got the praise, the college fund, the family's undivided attention. I got the leftovers, if anything at all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Last week's family dinner was typical. Mom had invited us over to celebrate Amanda's engagement to Ryan Cooper, this hotshot surgeon from a wealthy family. The moment I walked into the dining room, I could feel the familiar weight of being the afterthought. Mom, Linda Harris, had set the table with her good china, flowers in the center, the works. Amanda sat there glowing in her designer dress, flashing her enormous engagement ring every chance she got. "Sarah, you're late," Mom said without looking up, her tone flat. She was busy adjusting Amanda's chair, making sure her golden child had the perfect seat. "We've been waiting." I was 5 minutes late because my old Honda had trouble starting again, but there was no point explaining. Gary, my stepfather, gave me a quick nod from across the table. He'd been part of our family since I was 12, but he'd learned long ago to follow Mom's lead when it came to family dynamics. "Sorry," I mumbled, sliding into the chair at the far end of the table, the same spot I'd occupied for years. "Amanda was just telling us about the wedding venue," Mom gushed, her eyes sparkling as she turned back to her favorite daughter. "The Broadmoor. Can you imagine? It's going to be absolutely stunning." I knew the Broadmoor. It was the kind of place that cost more for one night than I made in 3 months. Amanda beamed as she described the ballroom, the mountain views, the 7-course menu they were planning. Ryan nodded along, occasionally adding details about the wine selection or the live orchestra they'd hired. "What about you, Sarah? Any special someone in your life?" Before I could answer, Mom jumped in. "Oh, Sarah's focusing on her career right now." The way she said career made it sound like a dirty word. "She's been at that dental office for, 3 years now?" "4," I corrected quietly. "Right, 4. Well, everyone has their own path, I suppose." Mom's smile was thin, dismissive. She turned back to Amanda. "Tell us more about the wedding dress shopping trip." I listened as Amanda described trying on gowns that cost more than my car, how Mom had cried when she found the one, how they'd spent the whole day bonding over champagne and designer labels. I thought about my own day, cleaning teeth and scheduling appointments, coming home to a frozen dinner and Netflix. The conversation flowed around me like I wasn't there. Mom asked about Ryan's residency program, his family's country club membership, their honeymoon plans for Tuscany. When Amanda mentioned needing help with wedding favors, Mom immediately volunteered to take time off work. When I mentioned getting recognition at work for increasing patient satisfaction scores, the table went quiet for exactly 3 seconds before Mom asked Amanda about flower arrangements. After dinner, I watched from the kitchen window as Ryan helped Amanda into his BMW. The car was sleek, black, probably cost more than I'd make in 2 years. Mom and Gary waved from the front porch like proud parents sending off royalty. I dried dishes alone, listening to Mom gush to Gary about how perfect Amanda's life was turning out. "Ryan's family has such good connections," Mom was saying. "Amanda will want for nothing. They're talking about buying a house in Cherry Hills Village." I finished the dishes and gathered my purse, preparing for the usual awkward goodbye. "Thanks for dinner, Mom." "Oh, leaving already?" She barely looked up from the wedding magazine Amanda had left behind. "Drive carefully, that car of yours." She didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she meant. My 12-year-old Honda, with its scratched paint and quirky engine, was just another reminder of how I'd fallen short of expectations. I'd bought it used with money I'd saved from working 2 jobs through community college, back when I'd stupidly thought getting my dental assistant certification would impress anyone. The drive home was quiet except for the radio and the occasional rattle from my exhaust pipe. I thought about Amanda's college experience, fully funded, versus mine, working nights at a diner to pay for classes. I thought about the piano lessons Mom had paid for Amanda when she was 8, while I'd been told we couldn't afford music lessons for both of us. I thought about every family photo where Amanda stood in the center, bright smile, while I hovered on the edges. Back at my apartment, I heated up leftover pizza and called my coworker Michelle. She was one of the few people who understood what it felt like to be overlooked by your own family. How was the royal celebration? She'd heard enough stories about family dinners to know what I was dealing with. About what you'd expect, Mom practically levitated with pride while Amanda showed off her ring. I might as well have been furniture. You know what your problem is, Sarah? You keep showing up expecting it to be different.
Michelle was right, but what choice did I have? These people were my family, for better or worse. Amanda might be the golden child, but part of me still hoped that someday Mom would see me, really see me, and realize I was worth something too. I was getting ready for bed when my phone rang, unknown number, probably a telemarketer. But something made me answer. Miss Bennett, this is Jennifer Walsh from Walsh & Associates. I'm calling about your grandmother Rose's estate. Could we schedule a meeting to discuss her will? My heart stopped. Grandma Rose had passed 6 months ago, and I'd assumed everything would go to Mom or be split among the grandchildren. Rose had always been kind to me, but she'd lived so modestly in her little apartment. What could there possibly be to discuss? I'm sorry, there must be some mistake, I said. I wasn't expecting... No mistake, Miss Bennett. Your grandmother left specific instructions. There are some matters we need to discuss in person. Would tomorrow afternoon work for you? I agreed to meet her the next day, my mind racing. As I hung up, I wondered what Grandma Rose could have possibly left me. Maybe some jewelry, maybe a small savings account. Whatever it was probably the first time in my life that someone had chosen me first. Jennifer Walsh's law office was nothing like I'd expected. The waiting room had thick carpets and oil paintings, the kind of place that screamed expensive legal services. I'd worn my best dress, a navy blue number I usually saved for job interviews, but I still felt underdressed. Miss Bennett? A woman in her 40s approached me, extending her hand. I'm Jennifer Walsh. Thank you for coming. She led me to a conference room with a massive wooden table. Spread across it were documents, folders, and what looked like financial statements. My stomach churned. This was way more paperwork than I had expected for a small inheritance. Please, have a seat. Jennifer's voice was kind but professional. I know this might come as a surprise, but your grandmother Rose was quite specific about her wishes. She handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Rose's familiar handwriting. She asked me to give you this first, before we discuss the estate details. My hands shook as I opened it. Rose's voice seemed to echo from the pages. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably confused about why you're sitting in a lawyer's office. I want you to know that everything I'm about to tell you comes from a place of love and recognition of who you truly are. For years, I watched your family overlook your intelligence, your kindness, your incredible work ethic. I saw how you budgeted every penny, how you helped others even when you had nothing to spare, how you never complained even when you deserved so much better. You reminded me of myself at your age, underestimated but determined. What your family doesn't know is that I've been investing quietly for over 60 years. I started with small amounts, reinvesting dividends, learning about markets and companies. I lived modestly not because I had to, but because I chose to. Every dollar not spent was a dollar that could grow. I'm leaving everything to you, Sarah, because you're the only one who truly understands the value of money and hard work. You're the only one who won't take this gift for granted. Use it wisely, use it to build the life you deserve, and don't let anyone make you feel guilty for having what they couldn't earn. You are so much more than they've ever allowed you to believe. All my love, Grandma Rose. P.S. Remember those afternoons we spent going over your budget? You have a gift with numbers that even you don't realize yet. I looked up at Jennifer, my eyes swimming with tears. I don't understand. Grandma Rose lived in that tiny apartment, drove that old car. She was very deliberate about maintaining that lifestyle, Jennifer said gently. But, Miss Bennett, Your grandmother's estate is valued at approximately $2.3 million. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table, sure I'd misheard. I'm sorry, did you say $2.3 million? Yes, mostly in a diversified investment portfolio she managed herself. She was remarkably savvy about the market. I thought about all those Saturday afternoons when I was younger, visiting Grandma Rose in her small apartment. She'd make tea and we'd sit at her kitchen table while she helped me figure out my community college budget. She'd ask about my expenses, my income from the diner, how much I was saving. I thought she was just being a caring grandmother, but she was teaching me. She saw potential in you that others missed, Jennifer continued. According to her notes, she watched you work 2 jobs to put yourself through school while your sister received full family support. She noticed how you never asked for help, even when you struggled. More memories flooded back. Rose quietly paying for my textbooks one semester when I was short on money, claiming she'd gotten a small windfall from an old savings account. The time she'd given me grocery money, saying she'd bought too much and didn't want it to go to waste. All those little gestures that had kept me afloat. There are some conditions, Jennifer said, pulling out more documents. The money is yours outright, but she's requested that you take time to consider your options carefully. She also wanted me to advise you about family reactions to sudden wealth.
What do you mean? Jennifer's expression grew serious. In my experience, significant inheritances can change family dynamics dramatically. People who previously ignored you may suddenly become very interested in your welfare. Your grandmother was aware of this pattern in your family. The weight of what she was saying sank in. $2.3 million. After years of checking my bank balance obsessively, calculating whether I could afford lunch out, wearing clothes until they fell apart, I was suddenly wealthy. She also left this. Jennifer handed me a small box. Inside was Rosa's simple wedding ring and a key. The key is to a safety deposit box with some additional documents and photos she wanted you to have. I slipped the ring onto my right hand. It fit perfectly. What happens now? I asked. That's entirely up to you. I can help you set up accounts, discuss investment strategies, whatever you need. But Miss Bennett, Jennifer's voice was earnest. Your grandmother's advice about taking time to consider your options, I'd strongly recommend following it. Don't rush into any major decisions, especially regarding family. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling. Every red light gave me time to process another piece of what had just happened. Grandma Rose, who'd clipped coupons and shopped sales, had been secretly wealthy. She'd seen something in me that my own mother had missed. She'd chosen me. By the time I reached my apartment, one thing was crystal clear. I wasn't ready to tell my family about this. Not yet. I needed time to understand what this meant, to figure out how to handle something this life-changing. I thought about Amanda's engagement party, how Mom had fawned over Ryan's family money, how impressed she'd been with their connections and status. What would happen when she learned that quiet, overlooked Sarah was suddenly the wealthy one in the family? Jennifer's warning echoed in my mind. Family dynamics could change dramatically. I'd spent 29 years being treated like the family disappointment. I wasn't naive enough to think that money would fix the real problems between us, but I was curious to see if it would change how they treated me. For now, though, this secret was mine. Grandma Rose had given me more than money. She'd given me validation, proof that someone had truly seen my worth. I wasn't ready to share that with people who'd never appreciated me in the first place. That night, I set up my small kitchen table with Rose's letter, reading it over and over. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like maybe I was enough, exactly as I was. Keeping $2.3 million secret turned out to be harder than I had expected. Not the logistics. Jennifer had helped me set up accounts and move the money safely, but the emotional weight of walking through my life knowing everything had changed while everyone around me remained clueless. My first test came the next week when Michelle mentioned her son Tyler needed surgery for his appendicitis, but her insurance was fighting the claim. She was looking at thousands in medical bills she couldn't afford. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I might have to pick up a second job, she said during our lunch break, stirring her coffee absently. Tyler's dad sure isn't going to help, and my credit cards are already maxed out. Before my grandmother's gift, I would have offered sympathy and maybe helped her apply for financial assistance programs. Now, I could solve her problem with the equivalent of loose change, but how could I explain suddenly having money to spare? What if I lent you the money? I said carefully. I got a small inheritance from my grandmother, nothing huge, but enough to help. Michelle's eyes widened. Sarah, I couldn't ask you to do that. You didn't ask. I'm offering. We can work out a payment plan that works for you, no interest, no pressure. I wrote her a check for $5,000 that afternoon, claiming it was most of my inheritance. The grateful tears in her eyes made the deception worth it. This was what money should be for, helping people you care about, not buying status symbols or impressing others. But the secret felt heavier after that. Every interaction with my family became a performance where I had to remember to act like the same financially struggling Sarah they'd always known. Amanda's engagement party the following weekend was torture. Held at the country club where Ryan's family had a membership, it was exactly the kind of event Mom lived for. She'd invited everyone, family, coworkers, neighbors, anyone who could witness Amanda's ascension to social status. I arrived in my old Honda, parked between BMWs and Mercedes, wearing a dress I'd owned for 3 years. Inside, the party was in full swing. Amanda glowed in a designer cocktail dress, showing off her ring to anyone within arm's reach. Mom fluttered around like a proud peacock, making sure everyone knew her daughter was marrying into Denver's medical elite. Sarah, Ryan's mother Patricia Cooper approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How nice to see you again. Amanda tells me you work in dentistry? I'm a dental assistant, I said, watching her expression flicker with polite disappointment. How practical. She glanced around, clearly looking for an escape route. Well, we all need dental care, don't we? I excused myself and found refuge by the appetizer table, watching Ryan work the room with Amanda on his arm. He was handsome, successful, everything Mom had ever wanted for her daughters. But I noticed how his eyes lingered on other women, how he name-dropped his connections, how he seemed more interested in who was watching than in Amanda.
You look like you're having about as much fun as I am, a familiar voice said behind me. I turned to find Jake Miller, my friend from work. He was a paramedic who sometimes brought patients to our dental office for emergency repairs after accidents. We'd grown close over the past year, bonding over our shared sense of humor and similar backgrounds. Jade, what are you doing here? Amanda invited me when she came in for her cleaning last month, said it would be nice for you to have a friend here. He glanced around the room. Though I'm starting to think I stick out like a sore thumb. Jake was wearing his one good suit, the same one he wore to weddings and funerals. It was clean and pressed, but obviously off the rack. Next to Ryan's custom Italian tailoring, he looked like exactly what he was, a working-class guy doing his best in an upscale crowd. You look fine, I said, meaning it. Jake had an honest face, kind eyes, and the kind of genuine warmth that money couldn't buy. Better than fine, actually. We spent the rest of the party talking quietly in the corner, making gentle fun of the pretentious conversations around us. When Amanda announced her wedding would be in 6 months at the Broadmoor, Jake raised an eyebrow. That's the place with the $500 a night rooms, right? Starting at $500, I corrected. It goes up from there. Must be nice, he said, without bitterness. My family's idea of a fancy wedding was the church basement and potluck catering. I thought about the money sitting in my accounts, how I could afford to stay at the Broadmoor for months without thinking about it. The disconnect between my new reality and Jake's assumption about my finances made my chest tight with guilt. Later that week, I made my first real purchase with the inheritance money. My Honda had finally given up completely, leaving me stranded at work with a dead transmission. Instead of taking out a loan for another used car, I bought a reliable 2-year-old Toyota Camry. Nothing flashy, just dependable transportation. Nice car, Michelle said when I drove it to work for the first time. That inheritance was bigger than you let on, wasn't it? I got a good deal, I said quickly. And I figured it was time to stop pouring money into repairs. She seemed to accept this. But I noticed her watching me more carefully after that. Small lies were adding up, creating a web I was struggling to maintain. The breaking point came when Uncle Tom called me out of the blue. Sarah, honey, can we talk?
I'm handling some paperwork for your grandmother's estate, and I've got some questions. My stomach dropped. Tom was my father's brother, a practical man who ran a successful auto repair business. If anyone would notice discrepancies in Rose's estate, it would be him. What kind of questions? Well, I was looking at the probate filings, and the numbers don't quite add up. According to the documents I've seen, your grandmother's assets were minimal, just her savings account and some personal effects. But I know she met with lawyers several times before she passed. Did she leave anything else to you kids? I felt trapped. Tom wasn't asking out of greed or nosiness. He was genuinely trying to make sure everything was handled properly. But I wasn't ready to reveal the inheritance, especially not to someone who would definitely tell the rest of the family. Just some jewelry and family photos. Nothing significant. Tom sounded puzzled. Well, if you come across any other paperwork, let me know. I want to make sure everything is filed correctly with the court. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment, feeling the weight of the secret pressing down on me. Lying to Michelle about small amounts was one thing, but lying to Tom about legal matters felt more serious. And what would happen when he kept digging? Jennifer had mentioned that some estate information was public record. I was also starting to notice changes in my own behavior. I caught myself looking at expensive items online, imagining what it would be like to buy them without checking my bank balance first. I'd always been careful with money out of necessity, but now I had to be careful not to accidentally reveal my new financial freedom. The stress was exhausting. I thought having money would make my life easier, but keeping it secret was turning every interaction into a potential minefield. I found myself withdrawing from family gatherings, making excuses to avoid situations where I might slip up. But the real wake-up call came when Gary had his heart attack. I was at work when Mom called, her voice shaking with panic. "Sarah, Gary's in the hospital. They think it's his heart. Can you meet us at Presbyterian St. Joseph?" I dropped everything and drove straight to the hospital, my mind racing. Gary had been part of our family for 17 years. He wasn't my biological father, but he'd been the closest thing to a stable parent figure I'd had growing up. The thought of losing him made my chest tight with fear. At the hospital, I found Mom pacing in the cardiac wing waiting room, still in her work clothes, her face pale with worry. Amanda sat in a chair nearby, her medical training evident as she peppered the nurses with technical questions about Gary's condition. "How is he?"
"They're doing tests," Mom said, her voice hollow. "His supervisor said he'd been complaining about chest pain for weeks, but didn't want to miss work. You know Gary, he never wants to be a burden." The irony hit me like a punch to the stomach. Gary had been worried about medical bills, about missing work, about being a financial burden to the family. He'd suffered in silence rather than seek help he couldn't afford. And I was sitting on enough money to pay for his care 100 times over. As we waited for news from the doctors, I watched Mom's hands shake as she tried to fill out insurance paperwork. I listened to Amanda calculating the costs of cardiac procedures, her voice clinical but worried. I thought about Gary in the ICU, probably scared about more than just his health. This secret that had felt protective was starting to feel selfish. My family was facing a real crisis, and I had the power to help them. But revealing the inheritance now would raise questions I wasn't ready to answer, and it would change everything between us forever. Looking at Mom's frightened face, I realized that my comfortable bubble of secrecy was about to burst whether I wanted it to or not. Gary's heart attack changed everything in ways I never saw coming. What started as a medical emergency quickly spiraled into a financial crisis that would force my carefully guarded secret into the open. The surgery went well, but Gary's recovery meant months off work. His construction supervisor was sympathetic but clear. No work meant no paycheck, and their insurance had massive deductibles. Within a week, medical bills started piling up. Cardiac procedures, specialists, medications, follow-up appointments. The numbers were staggering. I watched Mom transform from relieved wife to frantic financial planner overnight. She spread bills across the kitchen table like battle plans, calculator in hand, trying to make impossible math work. Gary sat quietly in his recliner, pale and weak, but I could see the guilt eating at him every time Mom sighed over another invoice. "We'll have to dip into Amanda's wedding fund," Mom finally announced during a family meeting. "There's no other choice." Amanda's face went white. Mom, the deposits are non-refundable. We'd lose everything. Then we'll have a smaller wedding. Family comes first. But even the wedding fund wouldn't cover everything. I knew because I'd been quietly calculating the totals myself. Gary needed at least $40,000 in immediate care, with ongoing costs that could easily double that amount. That's when Uncle Tom dropped his bombshell. "I've been going through Rose's paperwork," he said, pulling out a folder. "Something doesn't add up. The probate filing shows minimal assets, but I found records of substantial investment accounts. Sarah, are you sure your grandmother didn't leave you anything significant?" Every eye in the room turned to me. Mom's expression shifted from desperate to calculating in a heartbeat. Amanda leaned forward, suddenly very interested in what I might say. I started, then stopped. Looking at Gary's worried face, at Mom's mounting panic, at the stack of bills that represented someone's life and health, I made a decision that would change everything. "Actually, yes, Grandma Rose left me some money." "How much?" Mom asked immediately. I took a deep breath. About $2.3 million. The silence was deafening. Amanda's mouth fell open. Gary looked stunned. Mom's eyes went wide, then narrow, like she was processing something unbelievable. $2.3 million? Mom repeated slowly. "Sarah, why didn't you tell us?" I needed time to process it. It was overwhelming. But Mom wasn't listening anymore. I could practically see the gears turning in her head. Calculating what this meant, how it changed everything, Amanda looked like she'd been slapped. "Well," Mom said, her voice suddenly bright, artificially cheerful, "this is wonderful news. Gary, honey, you don't need to worry about anything. Sarah can help us." And just like that, I wasn't the family disappointment anymore. I was the solution. I wrote a check for $50,000 that afternoon, covering Gary's immediate medical expenses and setting up a fund for ongoing care. Gary cried when I handed it to him. Genuine tears of relief and gratitude. That part felt good, felt right. Gary had been kind to me for 17 years, and helping him was an honor. But Mom's reaction was different. Suddenly, I was getting daily phone calls asking for advice, opinions, approval. She wanted to know about my investment strategy, my financial planning, my thoughts on everything from insurance policies to vacation destinations. "You've always been so smart with money," she said during one call, as if she'd been saying this her whole life instead of dismissing my financial struggles for years. Amanda, meanwhile, had gone quiet. Not angry exactly, but watchful, like she was trying to figure out how this development affected her position in the family hierarchy. The most unsettling change was Ryan's behavior. At the next family dinner, he spent more time talking to me than to Amanda, asking about my investment philosophy and complimenting my business acumen. Amanda noticed. I noticed. Everyone noticed. "Funny how money changes everything," Jake said when I told him what had happened. He was right, and it scared me. I'd spent my whole life wanting my family's approval, their recognition, their love. Now I had all three, but it felt hollow, conditional, tied to something I inherited rather than earned.
The golden child crown was being passed to me, and I wasn't sure I wanted to wear it. Within a month of revealing my inheritance, I'd gone from family afterthought to family treasure. The transformation was so complete, so jarring, that I sometimes felt like I was living in someone else's life. Mom started calling me every morning just to check in, which really meant picking my brain about financial decisions. Should she refinance the house? Was now a good time to buy that new car? What did I think about Gary's retirement planning? These were conversations she'd never had with me before, topics she'd previously discussed only with Amanda. "Your business sense is just remarkable," she gushed during one of these calls. "I don't know why I never noticed it before." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been managing a tight budget for years, stretching every dollar, making careful financial decisions out of necessity. But when I was poor, it was just getting by. Now that I had money, suddenly it was business acumen. The shift in Amanda's status was even more dramatic. At family dinners, Mom would interrupt Amanda's stories about her medical residency to ask my opinion on restaurant choices or vacation planning. When Amanda mentioned a challenging surgery she'd assisted with,
Mom nodded politely, then turned to me to discuss investment portfolios. Sarah, what do you think about that new development in Cherry Hills Village? Mom asked during Sunday dinner, completely cutting off Amanda's story about a patient she had helped save. Amanda's face flushed, but she stayed quiet. Ryan, however, perked up immediately. "That's actually a great question," he said, leaning toward me with interest. "Those properties are really well positioned for appreciation. Very exclusive neighborhood." I watched Amanda's expression darken as her fiancé spent the next 10 minutes discussing real estate with me instead of paying attention to her. When she tried to redirect the conversation to their wedding plans, Ryan seemed distracted, half listening while stealing glances at me. The breaking point came during Amanda's bridal shower. Mom had spent weeks planning an elaborate event at the country club, but halfway through the gift opening, she started talking about my inheritance. Sarah's grandmother was just so wise with her investments. She really saw Sarah's potential for financial management. I watched Amanda's face crumble as the attention shifted away from her special day to my money. Her friends looked confused, unsure whether to congratulate me or refocus on the bride. The whole event took on an awkward energy that no amount of champagne could fix. Later, I found Amanda crying in the bathroom. "This is supposed to be my day," she whispered, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I've been planning this for months, and she can't stop talking about my inheritance." For the first time since the revelation, I felt genuinely sorry for Amanda. She had been the golden child her entire life, basking in Mom's approval and attention. Now she was experiencing what I'd felt for 29 years, being overshadowed, overlooked, treated as less important. "Amanda, I'm sorry. I didn't want—" "Don't," she cut me off, wiping her eyes. "Just don't. You have no idea what it's like to lose everything you thought you were." But I did know. I'd been losing that my whole life until a month ago. The most disturbing change was in Ryan's behavior. He'd started texting me directly, asking for coffee meetings to discuss investment opportunities. He complimented my intelligence, my insights, my natural business instincts. During family gatherings, he positioned himself near me, finding excuses to touch my arm or lean close when we talked. "Ryan's really impressed with your financial knowledge," Amanda said one evening, her voice tight with forced casualness. "He keeps talking about how sophisticated your investment strategy must be." I could see the hurt in her eyes, the growing suspicion that her fiancé was more interested in my bank account than her heart. And honestly, she wasn't wrong. Ryan's attention felt calculated, opportunistic, like he was already thinking about which sister offered better long-term prospects. The final straw came when Mom suggested I buy a house in Amanda's dream neighborhood. "You should really consider Cherry Hills Village," Mom said over dinner. "A woman of your means deserves a home that reflects her success." Amanda went very still. Cherry Hills Village was where Amanda and Ryan had planned to buy their first house after the wedding, once they'd saved enough for a down payment. Now Mom was suggesting I could just write a check for one. "I'm fine in my apartment," I said quickly. "Nonsense. You're practically wealthy, Sarah. You should live like it." That night, I realized what was happening. Mom wasn't just shifting her attention from Amanda to me, she was actively diminishing Amanda to elevate me. It was the same toxic favoritism pattern, just with reversed roles. For years, I'd been the one feeling invisible, overlooked, not good enough. Now, Amanda was experiencing that pain, and it was awful to witness. Mom's love wasn't becoming more inclusive. It was just changing targets based on who offered more value. I'd thought money would solve my family problems, but it was just revealing how conditional and shallow those relationships had always been. The Golden Child crown wasn't a prize worth having if it meant someone else had to suffer to make me feel special.
Setting boundaries with my newly attentive family turned out to be like wrestling with quicksand. The harder I struggled to establish limits, the more I seemed to sink into their expectations and demands. It started when Amanda asked me to upgrade her wedding dress.
The sample I tried on was perfect, but the one in my size has a tiny stain, she explained, her voice carefully casual. The designer can fix it, but it would cost $3,000, or I could order a new one for $8,000. She didn't directly ask me to pay, but the implication hung between us like a loaded gun. Before my inheritance, this would have been her problem to solve. Now, suddenly, it was my responsibility to consider. That's tough, I said. What are you going to do? Amanda's face fell. With your inheritance, it would be nothing to you. It's not about the money, Amanda. It's your wedding dress. But saying no felt like swallowing glass. I could see the hurt in her eyes, the growing resentment that I wasn't automatically solving every financial problem that crossed our family's path. Mom's reaction was worse. Sarah, honey, don't you think family should help family? She said when Amanda told me I'd declined. You have so much now, and Amanda's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. I already paid for Gary's medical bills, I reminded her. That was different. Gary was in crisis. Mom's voice took on that manipulative tone I remembered from childhood, the one that made me feel selfish for having any needs of my own. This is about supporting your sister's happiness. The guilt trip was expertly delivered, hitting all my vulnerable spots. But something had changed in me since inheriting Rose's money. Maybe it was reading her letter, understanding that someone had truly seen my worth. Maybe it was finally having options. But I found myself pushing back instead of automatically giving in. No, Mom. Amanda's wedding dress is not my responsibility. The silence on the phone was arctic. I see, Mom said, finally. I suppose money really does change people. That accusation stung because part of me worried it was true. Was I becoming selfish, stingy, different from who I'd always been? I called Jennifer Walsh, my lawyer, desperate for perspective. Let me ask you something, Jennifer said. Before your inheritance, when you were struggling financially, did your family offer to help with your expenses? I thought about all the times I'd eaten ramen for weeks to make rent, all the medical bills I'd put on credit cards, all the repairs my car had needed while Amanda was getting help with her student loans. No, I admitted. Then why is it suddenly your obligation to fund their wants and needs now? Jennifer was right, but knowing that intellectually didn't make the emotional manipulation easier to handle. Mom started calling less frequently, and when she did, her tone was cool, disappointed. She made comments about how some people let money go to their heads, how wealth without generosity was meaningless. Amanda joined the campaign, making pointed comments about my selfishness during family gatherings. Even Gary seemed confused by my reluctance to fund every family expense, though he was gentler about it. I just don't understand why you won't help Amanda, he said during one of our conversations. You helped me when I needed it. Gary, you needed heart surgery. Amanda wants an expensive dress. But explaining the difference felt impossible when everyone around me seemed to think my money made me responsible for their happiness. The breaking point came when Ryan approached me directly. Sarah, I want to talk to you about an investment opportunity, he said, cornering me at a coffee shop near my work. I'm looking at opening a private practice, and I could use a silent partner. His proposal was slick, professional, complete with projected returns and market analysis. But underneath the business language, I heard something else, an assumption that my money was available for his ambitions. How much are you looking for? I asked. $200,000 for the initial setup. I'd pay you back with interest, of course. $200,000. To Ryan, it probably was a reasonable request from someone with my net worth. But to me, it felt like being used, like he saw me as a walking ATM rather than a person. I need to think about it, I said. Ryan's smile faltered slightly. Of course, take your time, but opportunities like this don't come around often. That evening, I called Michelle and Jake, desperate to talk to people who knew me before the money, who might help me figure out if I was being reasonable or selfish. Your family's treating you like a lottery ticket, Michelle said bluntly. Before your inheritance, did any of them ask your opinion about their major life decisions? Jake was even more direct. You've been generous. You paid for Gary's medical care, which was genuinely needed. Everything else is just people wanting you to fund their wishes. Their support gave me courage to set clearer boundaries.
I told Amanda I wouldn't be paying for wedding upgrades. I declined Ryan's investment proposal. I stopped taking Mom's guilt trip phone calls about family obligations. The backlash was swift and brutal. Mom accused me of becoming cold and calculating. Amanda claimed I was jealous of her happiness and trying to ruin her wedding. Even some extended family members started making comments about how money had changed me.
But for the first time in my life, I was choosing my own well-being over their approval. It hurt, but it also felt like freedom. You're learning an important lesson, Jennifer told me during one of our meetings. Money doesn't just change how people see you, it reveals who they really were all along. Mom's solution to my newfound backbone was to call in reinforcements. She organized what she called a family meeting, but felt more like an intervention designed to pressure me into compliance. "We need to talk about Sarah's attitude lately," Mom announced when I arrived at her house to find Uncle Tom, Aunt Carol, and my cousin Katie already seated around the dining room table. "I'm concerned that the inheritance has changed her in ways that aren't healthy for our family." I felt ambushed. This wasn't a casual family gathering. It was a coordinated attack designed to make me feel outnumbered and guilty. Amanda sat at Mom's right hand, looking victorious, while Gary shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sarah's been pulling away from the family," Mom continued, her voice taking on that wounded tone she'd perfected over the years. "She's refusing to help with Amanda's wedding, turning down reasonable investment opportunities, acting like her money makes her better than us." Uncle Tom nodded thoughtfully. He'd always been diplomatic, trying to keep peace in the family. "Sarah, we just want to understand what's going on. Your grandmother would have wanted you to use that money to bring the family together, not drive us apart." Before I could respond, Aunt Carol spoke up, her voice sharp with barely contained anger. "Excuse me?" Mom's voice went ice cold. Carol turned to face her, years of witnessed injustice finally boiling over. "Linda, I've been watching you treat Sarah like garbage for 20 years. When she was struggling through college, working 2 jobs just to survive, did you offer help? When her car broke down repeatedly, did you assist with repairs? When she was eating ramen for dinner because she couldn't afford groceries, where was this family generosity?" "That's not fair," Mom protested. "We all have our struggles. But Amanda never had those struggles, did she? Amanda got her college paid for, got help with living expenses, got support for everything she needed. Sarah got criticism and dismissive comments about her choices." I watched Uncle Tom's face change as Carol spoke, like he was seeing our family dynamic clearly for the first time. Katie, my 24-year-old cousin, was nodding along with her mother's words. "And now," Carol continued, "the minute Sarah has something you want, suddenly she's family again. Suddenly her opinions matter. Suddenly she's smart and capable and worthy of attention. It's disgusting." Amanda jumped in, her voice shaking with anger. "That's not true. We've always supported Sarah." "Have you?" Katie interrupted, surprising everyone. "Because I remember Sarah's birthday parties where maybe 3 people showed up while Amanda's were huge productions. I remember Christmas mornings where Amanda got expensive gifts and Sarah got practical items like socks and grocery store gift cards." The accusations were flying now, years of buried resentment erupting across the dinner table. Tom tried to mediate, suggesting we all calm down and discuss things rationally, but the damage was already done. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Mom said, her voice rising. "Sarah's inheritance is tearing this family apart. Rose would be heartbroken to see us fighting like this." But Carol wasn't finished. "Rose knew exactly what kind of people you were, Linda. That's why she left everything to Sarah, and not to you or Amanda. She saw who had character and who didn't." The words hung in the air like a slap. Mom's face went white with rage, and I realized that this moment had been building for decades.
Carol had been watching, judging, waiting for the right moment to defend me. "I think this meeting is over," Tom said quietly, but the battle lines had already been drawn. As we filed out of Mom's house, Carol squeezed my arm. "You don't owe them anything, honey. Don't let them guilt you into thinking you do." Katie hugged me before getting in her parents' car. "Mom's right, Sarah. You deserve better than this." Driving home, I realized that my inheritance hadn't created the family conflict. It had just revealed divisions that already existed. Some people had been genuinely caring about me all along, while others had been waiting for a reason to value me. The family was splitting into camps, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing alone on the losing side. Carol and Katie saw the truth about how I'd been treated. Even Tom seemed to be questioning the narrative he'd accepted for years. But the war was far from over. If anything, having allies made Mom and Amanda more desperate, more dangerous. They'd tried public pressure and failed. I had a feeling their next move would be more direct. I should have seen it coming. When public pressure and family guilt trips failed to break down my boundaries, Amanda resorted to something I never thought she'd attempt: outright theft. I discovered it on a Tuesday morning, when Jennifer Walsh called, her voice tense with concern. "Sarah, I need you to come to my office immediately. There's been an attempt to access your accounts that we need to discuss."
My stomach dropped. What kind of attempt? Someone tried to forge your signature on a loan application, using your inheritance as collateral. The bank caught it because the signature didn't match their records, but we need to figure out who has access to your financial information. I was at Jennifer's office within the hour, my hands shaking as she showed me the paperwork. It was a loan application for $50,000, supposedly signed by me, with Amanda listed as the primary beneficiary. The signature was close, but not perfect. Clearly, someone had practiced copying my handwriting. "Do you recognize this address?" Jennifer pointed to the contact information on the form. It was Amanda's apartment. My sister had tried to steal $50,000 from me using forged documents. "We need to call the police," Jennifer said. "This is fraud, Sarah. This is a felony." But I wasn't ready for that step yet. I needed to confront Amanda first, to understand how she could have justified this to herself. Maybe there was some explanation, some desperate circumstance that might make sense of this betrayal. I drove to Amanda's apartment, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and disbelief. She answered the door in her scrubs, clearly just home from a hospital shift. "Sarah, what a surprise! Come in, I was just making coffee." She seemed genuinely happy to see me, which made what I had to say even more surreal. "Amanda, we need to talk about the loan application." Her face went white, then red, then white again. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it, but something in my expression must have told her the game was up. "How did you find out?" "The bank called my lawyer." "Amanda, what the hell were you thinking?" She collapsed onto her couch, her head in her hands. "I'm drowning, Sarah. The wedding costs are spiraling out of control. Ryan's been pressuring me to upgrade everything, and I've maxed out my credit cards trying to keep up with his family's expectations." "So you decided to forge my signature and steal money from me?" "It wasn't stealing," she said, looking up with desperate eyes. "I was going to pay it back. I just needed a bridge loan until after the wedding, until Ryan and I combine our finances." "Amanda, this is fraud. You could go to prison for this." "I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I'm so tired of everyone thinking Ryan is going to leave me because I don't have money like you do now. I needed to prove that I could contribute something significant to our relationship." The pain in her voice was real, but it didn't excuse what she'd done. This wasn't a momentary lapse of judgment. It was calculated fraud that required planning, practice, and deliberate deception. "I have to tell Mom and Gary." "Please don't. Sarah, please. This will destroy me." But I was already pulling out my phone, calling Mom's number. Amanda sat there crying as I asked Mom and Gary to come over, saying we needed to discuss something urgent about Amanda.
When they arrived 20 minutes later, I laid out the evidence calmly: the loan application, the forged signature, the bank's detection of the fraud. Mom's reaction was exactly what I had expected and dreaded. "Oh, Amanda," she said, rushing to hug her crying daughter. "Honey, why didn't you come to us if you were struggling?" Then she turned to me, her eyes hard. "Sarah, you can't seriously be thinking of pressing charges against your own sister? She committed fraud, Mom. She tried to steal $50,000 from me." "She was desperate. You have millions, Sarah. Would $50,000 really have hurt you that much?" I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. Mom was defending Amanda for attempting theft because the amount was supposedly insignificant to me? "That's not the point, Linda." I used her first name deliberately, something I'd never done before. "The point is that Amanda committed a crime against me, and you're acting like I'm the problem for being upset about it." Gary finally spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. "Linda, what Amanda did was wrong. Sarah has every right to be angry." But Mom wasn't backing down. "Family forgives family, Gary. Sarah's being vindictive because she finally has power over us." That was the moment I realized there was no fixing this. Mom would enable any behavior from Amanda, would excuse any betrayal, would blame me for being hurt by my sister's criminal actions. The favoritism wasn't just about preference, it was about a complete inability to hold Amanda accountable for anything. "I'm done," I said, standing up. "Amanda, I'm not pressing charges, but only because I don't want the hassle. But we're finished. All of us. I'm cutting contact with this family." "Sarah, don't be dramatic," Mom said. "We can work through this." "No, we can't. Because you'll never see Amanda as capable of doing wrong, and you'll never see me as worthy of protection from that wrong. I'm done being your scapegoat." As I walked out of Amanda's apartment for the last time, I heard Mom comforting her, promising that Sarah would come around, that families always work things out. But some betrayals are too deep, some patterns too toxic to repair.
I'd finally learned the difference between family by blood and family by choice. It was time to choose better. Building a new life after cutting ties with my family was like learning to walk again. After 29 years of toxic dynamics, I had to figure out what healthy relationships actually looked like. Jake was my anchor through the transition. The day after my confrontation with Amanda, I showed up at his apartment sobbing, barely able to explain what had happened. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer advice, just held me while I cried out years of accumulated hurt and disappointment. "I keep thinking I should feel worse about cutting them off," I told him as we sat on his couch later that evening. "But mostly I just feel relieved." "That tells you everything you need to know," he said quietly. "Healthy relationships don't require that much emotional labor just to maintain them." Jake had become more than a friend over the past months. His steady presence, his genuine care, his complete lack of interest in my money had been a lifeline. When I finally kissed him that night, it felt like coming home to myself. Within a week, I'd blocked Mom's and Amanda's phone numbers, changed my address with the bank, and asked Jennifer to handle any legal communication for my family. The silence was initially jarring. No more daily guilt trip calls, no more manipulation disguised as concern. But it quickly became peaceful. Michelle was my second anchor. When I told her about Amanda's fraud attempt, her reaction was everything my mother's should have been. "She did what?" Michelle's voice was sharp with outrage. "Sarah, that's not family behavior. That's criminal behavior." I used part of my inheritance to help Michelle start her own administrative consulting business, something she'd dreamed about for years but never had the capital to attempt. Unlike my family's demands, this felt joyful, like using money the way it was meant to be used, to lift up people who deserved it. "I want to pay you back," Michelle insisted when I handed her the check for her startup costs. "You will, by being successful and happy. That's payment enough." The most surprising ally turned out to be Aunt Carol. After the disastrous family meeting, she'd continued reaching out, inviting me for coffee, including me in holiday plans with her side of the family.
Uncle Tom had apologized for initially siding with Mom, admitting that Carol had opened his eyes to patterns he'd been blind to for years. "Your cousin Katie talks about you all the time," Carol told me during one of our weekly coffee dates. "She says you're proof that money doesn't have to corrupt someone." Katie had become like the younger sister I'd always wanted. When she mentioned struggling with her final semester's tuition, I quietly paid it off, asking only that she focus on her social work studies instead of working extra jobs. Her gratitude was genuine, uncomplicated by entitlement or expectation. "You're helping me become who I want to be," she said when she graduated. "That's the best gift anyone's ever given me." 6 months after cutting contact with Mom and Amanda, I got a call from Gary. Mom had finally given me my new number, and he was calling to apologize. "Sarah, I should have stood up for you years ago," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I was so focused on keeping peace that I enabled Linda's behavior. I'm sorry." I met Gary for lunch the following week. He looked older, worn down by the family drama that had exploded after my departure. Mom was angry, Amanda was struggling with her relationship with Ryan, and the whole family dynamic had collapsed without me as the designated scapegoat. "Ryan broke off the engagement," Gary told me quietly. Apparently, his family wasn't impressed with Amanda's financial instability, and the fraud attempt was the final straw. I felt a complex mix of emotions hearing this. Vindication, certainly, but also genuine sadness for Amanda. Ryan had always been more interested in status than love, but losing him had to hurt. "Is she okay?" "She's struggling. Linda keeps saying this is all your fault, that if you'd been more generous with the inheritance, none of this would have happened." Even now, Mom was rewriting history to avoid accountability. But I'd learned not to take responsibility for other people's choices or their consequences. "I'm sorry Amanda is hurting," I said carefully. "But her choices led to these consequences, not mine." Gary nodded. "I know that now. I just wanted you to know that I see things clearly, finally. If you ever want to rebuild our relationship, I'd like that." I considered his offer carefully. Gary had been passive and enabling, but he'd never been actively cruel. His apology felt genuine, and everyone deserves a chance to grow. "Let's start slow," I said. "Coffee once a month, see how it goes." As winter turned to spring, my new life solidified around me. Jake and I talked about moving in together. Michelle's business was thriving, and she'd hired 2 employees. Katie was applying for graduate programs in social work. Carol and Tom had become surrogate parents, celebrating my successes and supporting me through difficulties. I'd also started therapy with Dr. Patricia Morgan, a specialist in family trauma and boundary setting. She helped me understand that my family's treatment of me wasn't my fault, that loving people didn't require accepting abuse, that choosing my own well-being wasn't selfish.
"We've built something beautiful," Dr. Morgan said during one of our sessions. "A chosen family based on mutual respect and genuine care. That takes tremendous courage." The final test came when Mom called from an unknown number, managing to get through my blocks. Her voice was tearful, pleading. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk. I miss you so much. Can't we just put all this behind us and be a family again?" "Mom, nothing's changed. You still think Amanda's fraud was my fault. You still believe I owe you access to my money. Until you can take responsibility for the toxic patterns in our family, there's nothing to discuss." "But you're my daughter. I love you." "Love isn't enough if it comes with conditions. I'm happy now, Mom. I'm surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not what I can provide. I hope someday you understand that." I hung up and blocked the new number. Jake found me crying afterward, not from sadness, but from relief. I'd finally said what needed to be said, set the boundary that needed to be set. Building a chosen family was the best investment I'd ever made with Rose's inheritance. Money had revealed who my real family was, and it wasn't the people who shared my DNA. It was the people who showed up consistently, who celebrated my successes without jealousy, who supported me without expecting payment in return. Grandma Rose had given me more than money. She'd given me the power to choose better, to demand better, to build better. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged. 1 year later, I stood in Michelle's new office space, watching her give a presentation to potential clients, and marveled at how much had changed. Her administrative consulting business had grown from a dream into a thriving company with 6 employees and a waiting list of clients. When she finished her pitch and walked over to me, her smile was radiant with accomplishment. "Remember when you thought you couldn't do this?" I teased, gesturing around the modern office space with its glass conference rooms and motivational quotes on the walls. "Remember when you thought helping me was too risky an investment?" She shot back, laughing. "Best decision you ever made with that inheritance money." She was right. Investing in Michelle hadn't just helped her build a business. It had shown me what my money could really accomplish when used to lift up people who deserved it. Her success felt like my success, but in the healthiest possible way. The celebration continued that evening at Katie's college graduation party. Carol and Tom had hosted it at their house, and watching Katie accept congratulations from everyone who'd supported her through social work school filled me with pride. She had already been accepted to graduate school and had lined up a job with a nonprofit organization helping at-risk youth. "Aunt Sarah," she said, pulling me aside during the party, "I know I've thanked you a million times, but I need you to know what paying for my last semester meant. I was going to drop out and work full-time. You literally saved my future." "You saved your own future, Katie. I just removed one obstacle." That was the difference between my chosen family and my biological one. Katie saw my help as removing a barrier to her own efforts, not as something she was entitled to receive. The gratitude was genuine because the support was earned through her own hard work and character. The biggest change, though, was Jake. 3 months earlier, he'd proposed during a quiet dinner at our favorite restaurant. Nothing flashy, no expensive ring, just a simple question asked by a man who genuinely loved me for who I was rather than what I owned. "I've been thinking about this for months," he said, taking my hand across the table. "Not because of your money, not because I think it's what we should do, but because I can't imagine building a life with anyone else. Will you marry me?" I'd said yes before he'd finished asking. Jake had been my constant through the hardest year of my life, supporting my decisions without trying to influence them, celebrating my growth without trying to take credit for it. He'd proven that authentic love existed, that someone could choose me for my character rather than my bank account. The only shadow on my happiness was Amanda's latest attempt at reconciliation. She'd called 2 weeks ago, her voice small and defeated.
"Sarah, Ryan and I broke up. Actually, he left me for someone else, someone whose family has better connections. I know you probably think I deserve it, but I wanted to apologize for what I did. The forgery, I mean. It was wrong." Her apology was real, but it was also incomplete. She was sorry for the forgery, but not for years of treating me like I was less than her. She was reaching out because she was alone and hurting, not because she genuinely recognized the toxic patterns in our family. "I appreciate the apology, Amanda," I'd said carefully. "And I'm sorry Ryan hurt you. But an apology for one action doesn't address the bigger problems between us." "What do you want me to say, Sarah? That I'm sorry for being Mom's favorite? I can't help how she treated us differently." That response told me everything I needed to know. Amanda still didn't understand that she'd participated in my marginalization, that she'd accepted and benefited from Mom's favoritism without ever defending me. Until she could see her own role in our family's dysfunction, there was no foundation for rebuilding. "I hope you find happiness, Amanda. I really do. But we can't have a relationship built on partial accountability." The conversation had been difficult, but necessary. I'd learned to distinguish between people who were genuinely changing and people who just wanted things to go back to the way they were. The most meaningful decision I'd made with Rose's inheritance was establishing a scholarship fund in her name. The Rose Bennett Foundation provided financial assistance to first-generation college students who showed determination and character despite economic disadvantage. Every year, we'd award scholarships to 10 students who reminded me of myself at that age,
Overlooked, underestimated, but quietly brilliant. Your grandmother would be so proud, Jennifer Walsh had said when we'd finished setting up the foundation. You're using her gift exactly the way she'd hoped. As I stood on the deck of Carol and Tom's house, watching my chosen family celebrate Katie's graduation, I thought about how different my life looked now compared to a year ago. I was engaged to a man who loved me authentically. I was surrounded by people who valued my character over my bank account. I was using my resources to create positive change rather than enable dysfunction. Mom had tried calling twice more, both times with variations of the same message. Family should forgive family. I was being too harsh. Amanda was struggling and needed support. But I'd learned that real family wasn't about blood relations or obligation. It was about people who showed up consistently, who celebrated your successes without jealousy, who supported your growth without trying to control it. Jake found me on the deck and wrapped his arms around me from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Just how lucky I am," I said, leaning back against his chest. Rose's money gave me options, but the people in this yard, they gave me a real family. He kissed the top of my head. "She'd be proud of the choices you made." Looking out at Michelle laughing with Carol, Katie hugging Gary, who'd become a regular part of our gatherings, and Tom grilling burgers while telling stories, I knew he was right. I'd built something beautiful from the ashes of toxic relationships. I'd learned that we can create the family we deserve through conscious choice and healthy boundaries. Rose's inheritance had revealed who my real family was. And it wasn't the people who shared my DNA. It was the people who showed up, who stayed, who loved me not for what I could provide, but for who I was when I had nothing left to give but myself. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by exactly the right people. I was home.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.